Optimize your circulation. 12 foods for better blood flow to your legs and feet. In the quiet suburbs of Asheville, North Carolina, where newspaper delivery trucks still drive by at 5 a.m. and church bells still ring every Sunday, lives a man named Frank Holloway, 73. Frank used to be a courier, 30 years of roaming around town, delivering door to door in his trademark high-top boots and never-ending stride. He used to joke that if the world stopped spinning, his legs would still be moving. But now, things are different. Frank began to feel something was wrong last year, when his feet, once the engines of his life, began to feel heavy, stiff, and cold as ice, even though the house was well heated. He started sleeping in thicker socks, propping his feet up on soft pillows, and every morning he would rub his feet for up to 10 minutes before putting them down. Maybe it's just age, he thought. But deep down, Frank knew this wasn't just old age. It was a sign from his body. A silent warning. Then one October afternoon, sitting on a bench near Beaver Lake, where he often went to read and greet fishing friends, Frank looked down at his old leather shoes and realized he could no longer feel the ground beneath his feet. That evening, Frank went home and rummaged through the old notebooks his wife had kept before she died. He remembered her jotting down healthy eating tips and quirky recipes that she believed nourished the blood and the spirit. On a yellowed page, he read a line scrawled in blue ink. Blood that reaches the feet means the heart still has the strength to love. Don't let the blood clot because of the wrong food. Frank didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table, tea in hand, turning pages and lines, and the next morning he went to the local farmer's market. From that day on, Frank's journey began not with medicine, but with food. But not randomly, not anything he heard from an advertisement. Every dish he chose was a part of his memory, a connection with his deceased wife, and a ray of hope. His legs had not stopped. But how can just a plate of grilled fish, a glass of beetroot juice, or a few walnuts change a 73-year-old body that is cooling from the inside out? Why are some older adults in the U.S. able to avoid amputations due to poor blood circulation with just a few small changes in their diet, while many others cannot? And is there a little-known nutritional secret located in your own kitchen that, if used correctly, you can restore vitality to your feet before it's too late? In this video, you won't find a dry list. You will step into a real-life story where each dish is a slice of memory, a milestone of revival, and a second chance for the legs that are gradually becoming silent. Follow Frank on his journey over 12 weeks with 12 simple yet magical foods, and see, is it possible that a man who once couldn't walk downstairs could walk 2 miles every morning just by using what's in his kitchen? If you have ever felt like your feet are disconnected from the rest of your body, or you have a loved one, a parent, spouse, elderly friend, who is experiencing a similar condition, please click like if you are interested in this journey, and click subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next part. And don't forget to comment and share your story, or send this video to a loved one if you think they need to hear this. Frank stood in front of the old kitchen, the yellow light from the bulb illuminating the calendar on the wall. The November page was crumpled and marked with faded blue ink. Thanksgiving was approaching. And this would be the 3rd year he'd spent the holiday alone, since Judith, his life partner, had died of heart complications. The house no longer had the warmth of her soft laughter, the familiar scent of the grilled salmon with lemon sauce she made every Saturday. But tonight he decided he would cook it again, not because of craving, but because of missing. Frank opened the refrigerator and took out a salmon fillet. For the first time in months, he washed the vegetables, cut the lemon, and turned on the stove. His hands shook slightly, but he did each step as if Judith were standing over him, whispering his words. As the oil began to simmer, the aroma wafted up. He closed his eyes. An image came to mind. Judith in her blue apron, her hair pulled back, her eyes shining as she said, "Fatty fish helps with circulation, Frank. It nourishes the brain, nourishes the heart, and keeps the blood from clogging." At that time, he just smiled and let it go. But now, as the blood in his legs seemed to freeze day by day, he realized how valuable her words were. Frank ate in silence, but inside a warmth began to flow again. Not from the food, but from the memories, the love, and the will to live that remained within him. It was a misty Thursday afternoon in suburban Asheville, North Carolina. A light breeze blew through the steamy windows, and red maple leaves littered the old wooden steps. In the small kitchen, which smelled faintly of mold from days when no one had cooked, Frank Holloway stood silently in front of the gas stove, holding a tattered leather notebook. The book belonged to his wife Judith, who had died 2 years ago of a heart attack in the middle of a winter night. Frank had usually closed the book and put it in a drawer, but tonight something compelled him to open it. The first page bore Judith's characteristic italic handwriting, written in blue ink that was smeared in places. Food is more than just nutrition. It is the love we give to our bodies. Frank paused. He flipped through the pages. There was a note under salmon with lemon sauce that Judith used to cook every Saturday. The omega-3 in fatty fish helps prevent blood clots, helping blood flow to the coldest parts of the body, like your feet, every winter. Frank bit his lip. Outside, the wind was howling. Inside, his feet were pale purple and numb, as they had been every cold night of the year. He reached for the apron Judith had worn, still hanging there. No one had dared to take it off, and suddenly a small piece of paper fell from the pocket. It was a half-written letter. Frank, if you're reading this, you're probably cold feet and not listening to me. You said that when you get old, the blood doesn't know its way back to your feet. But it's not old age. It's because we stop loving ourselves properly. Eat this meal, for me. A piece of fish, half a lemon, some coriander. I bet you the blood will come back. Frank stood frozen. His chest tightened, his hands shook, but he went to the refrigerator. He pulled out a salmon fillet that had been sitting there for 2 weeks. The kitchen light cast a soft yellow glow over the wooden table. Frank placed the fish on parchment paper, sprinkled it with sea salt and black pepper. He squeezed half a lemon, added a few slices of onion, and quietly turned on the oven. No music, no TV. Just the quiet hum of the oven fan and the ticking of the clock. Judith flashed in his mind, bright eyes, stirring the soup, hair pulled back in a navy silk scarf. Don't bake the fish for more than 12 minutes, or it will lose its omega-3s, she had warned. Frank nodded, as if she were still there, standing right behind him. He sat down at the dining table, across from the empty chair where Judith had sat. On the table was a plate of golden brown grilled fish, a few sprigs of fresh parsley, and a glass of cold water. Frank ate slowly, one bite at a time, not just because the fish tasted good, but because each bite carried a layer of memory. The sour taste of the lemon brought back the summer of 1984, driving to Oregon, eating grilled fish by the sea. The taste of the grilled onions reminded him of the first kitchen they painted. As he swallowed the last bite, Frank noticed something strange. His foot was no longer numb. The blood was flowing again after a long winter. Not hot, but warm. A little. And more than the blood, it was the feeling. He had just resurrected a part of himself. Frank sat down at his desk and took out a new notebook. He wrote, Day 1, salmon. Judith was right. Blood in my legs, not from the fish, but from falling in love with my body again. He put down his pen and sighed. It was snowing outside. 7 days had passed since that first salmon dinner. 7 days, and Frank had kept up a steady rhythm. Every afternoon he went to the corner farmer's market, where a few people still knew his name, even though he hadn't been there in 2 years. It was colder this week. Tuesday night, the temperature dropped to near freezing. Frank added another layer of blankets and put on a thermal vest, but he still couldn't sleep well. His feet were numb, as they had been every winter for the past 5 years. He woke up at 3 a.m., rubbing his feet until the soles of his feet were sore from rubbing too hard. He got up, put on his coat, and walked down to the kitchen. The refrigerator was empty except for some boiled chicken, celery, and a bunch of garlic with the skin still on. Frank remembered Judith saying, Garlic isn't just for colds, Frank. It opens up your blood vessels like a winter breeze. If you eat it right, it will bring blood back to where you thought it was disconnected. At that, he laughed. Where did you hear that? Judith smiled, not answering. But now there was no one left for him to laugh at. All that remained was what she had left, a note with a recipe for Italian chicken soup, with minced raw garlic added at the end, not cooked through to retain the allicin. Frank lit a small lamp in the kitchen. The pale yellow light cast shadows on the old, faded walls. He carefully peeled 3 cloves of garlic, chopped them, and let them sit for 10 minutes. Judith had said this would activate the precious substance she believed to be a nerve drug. When the soup boiled, he put garlic in the pot, turned off the stove, and left it untouched. He quietly poured it into a bowl and placed it on the dining table, along with a slice of toasted bread. Frank wasn't hungry, but he needed to eat, not for his stomach, for his legs, for Judith. Outside the window, a light snow began to fall. Frank took the spoon, sipping the soup. The smell of raw garlic spread quickly across his palate, pungent, strong, but also warm. He closed his eyes, and somehow his throat felt tight. No one eats garlic in the middle of the night, except someone who can't sleep. No one makes bouillabaisse just to make a promise to someone who's dead. But Frank didn't think about that. He just sat there, eating silently, as if Judith were sitting across from him, tilting her head, waiting for him to realize he'd made a mistake. When he finished eating, he stood up, about to go back to his room. And then he noticed the strangest thing of the week. His feet were no longer numb. No socks. No cold. Frank looked down at his feet covered in thin summer socks. Feet he'd kept warm with 3 layers of socks for the past 2 years. And now they were bloody. Frank climbed into bed, put his head under the pillow, and pulled the covers up to his chest. But this time he didn't move his legs or fidget. He lay flat, breathing evenly. And then he slept, as if those bitter winter nights had never happened. The next morning it was still dark, but Frank was awake. Not because of the cold, but because he felt something strange, life in the soles of his feet, like a pulse, like a call from the past. Frank sat down at his desk and opened his notebook. On the first page was a line Judith had written. Garlic opens the door for blood to return to the place the heart once forgot. Frank added below, the first night was uneventful, beginning to believe that Judith never spoke nonsense. The cold had eased after 2 weeks of eating Judith's secret recipe dinners, but then one Monday morning Frank stood in front of the bathroom mirror, tilting his head to look at himself. The mirror reflected a man with slightly disheveled gray hair, sunken eyes, and dark circles under his eyelids that were no longer unfamiliar. But this time he looked longer and saw something else. Eyes. Not the exhausted eyes like last month. Not the lifeless eyes like last year, but the eyes, waiting for something. Frank poured some oatmeal into a bowl. Next to it was a jar of walnuts he'd bought but had almost forgotten about. Judith had eaten them as a mid-afternoon snack. They have good fats, anti-inflammatory properties, and properties that help the blood flow like a spring river, she'd said. He'd laughed. My blood is a waterfall. How can you control it? Now he wants the river more. Frank peeled back the thin shell of the seed and bit into half. The rich taste was not appealing, but strange, like something familiar he had long forgotten. He remembered the first time he and Judith had walked around the Greenville Spring Festival together, each of them holding a bag of roasted walnuts. Judith had been wearing a red dress with a small pattern, her hair pulled back into a bun, her cheeks flushed from the spring breeze. Is my heart beating fast because I'm happy, or is it because my cholesterol is low? She asked, teasing him. Frank had laughed at that, a laugh that now echoed through the kitchen, like an echo from another world. Frank took a small bag of nuts to Beaver Lake. He sat down on the wooden bench on the shore, the place where he and Fred had sat for years every Sunday morning, fishing, drinking instant coffee, and talking about life. Fred was now older and frailer, with a cane, sitting alone, his eyes looking far away as if talking to friends who were no longer there. Frank approached, holding out the bag of nuts. No more fishing, old man? Fred turned around, his eyes lighting up. Oh, is that you, Frank? I thought you had disappeared with your wife. They both sat down, munching on the nuts, not saying much. Sometimes old friendships don't need words, just presence. I thought you were never coming back to this lake again, said Fred. Frank nodded. I thought the bleeding in my leg had stopped. Fred looked at him, not understanding. Frank laughed. She left a menu. I followed it. It was like tracing blood with spoons and forks and memory. Fred was silent for a moment and then said softly, Share that menu with me someday. Frank arrived home before dusk. He looked down at his feet. They no longer felt heavy after walking. No more pins and needles in the soles of his feet. He saw nothing miraculous, but he felt a return, not just of blood, but of a part of him that had long been abandoned, a sense of connection to himself. Frank wrote in his notebook, No numbness in my legs after walking today. Ate 7 walnuts. Saw Fred again. His eyes were like mine, 2 weeks ago. Lost. I haven't seen the light yet, but I'm starting to see the way. Frank sat in the dark, his hand gently stroking an old notebook on the wooden table. Beside him was a cup of tea that had gone cold since the night before. The night wind blew softly through the cracks in the door, carrying with it a familiar chill, a cold that no longer frightened him as it had before, but still enough to make the skin on his neck wrinkle. At the top of the new page, he wrote a single line, I'm still here. The yellow kitchen light fell on the floor where Judith had stood every winter evening holding a pot, her lips pursed as she tasted the broth. One night she had talked about something called golden milk, not that he had much interest in it, because of the turmeric. Who puts turmeric in milk? He had said. But Judith believes it reduces inflammation, improves circulation, and warms from the inside. She also says it acts like a blanket for the blood vessels, embracing the clogged pathways and soothing them. Frank never believed, and now she had given him no room to argue. All that remained was the recipe, turmeric, almond milk, black pepper, honey, and a slanted note at the bottom. If you miss me on cold nights, don't just cover yourself with a blanket. Make a drink of this. Frank stood and quietly opened the cupboard. The almond milk was still there. The turmeric was at the bottom. He mixed the ingredients, as if he were recreating Judith, from scraps. 1/2 teaspoon turmeric, a pinch of pepper, a teaspoon of wild honey. As the milk boiled, a fragrant smell rose from the kitchen, not of medicine, but of memories. Frank carried the glass out onto the porch. It was late, the fog was thick, the moon was hidden behind a thick layer of clouds. He sat down on a wooden chair. No socks, no footrest. The first sip was a bit harsh. The pepper hit his nose, the turmeric coated his tongue in a soft yellow layer. But it wasn't the taste that made him want to cry, it was the warm feeling, not the warmth on the skin. But the warmth was deeper, a flow that seemed to melt from the bones, from the intestines, then spread down to the hips, through the thighs, gradually, down to the heels. It was like someone had placed a warm hand on his leg and said, You are still you. Frank closed his eyes. In the darkness he saw Judith standing in the kitchen, her arms wrapped in an apron, smiling gently, whispering, You don't have to run, just don't stop. Frank didn't sleep that night. but not because his legs hurt or he couldn't sleep. He just wanted to sit there, feel the little bits of life flowing through him. No rush, no surprise, just an old blood coming back. The next morning was still misty, but he stepped down onto the porch without holding onto the armrests, without flinching when his feet touched the tiles, without fumbling. He walked as if the floor were the familiar ground of his youth. No one was there to witness it, no one to pat him on the shoulder. No applause, no lights, no epic background music. Just a 73-year-old man walking on his own 2 feet after many winters that seemed to freeze forever. Frank did not tell anyone about the glass of golden milk that night, not because he was shy, but because there were things that should only be kept to himself, like a silent promise between him and his deceased wife. But the next morning he woke up earlier than usual. His legs were no longer heavy. He did not need to lean his elbows against the wall to stand up. His walk that morning was different. He didn't just walk around the front yard. He went deeper, down the side street to the old bakery where Judith used to buy her favorite strawberries every spring. Strawberries. Yes. On the counter by the window, he saw a tray of red, plump strawberries, so bright that the morning sun reflected through their glassy skins. Strawberries are more than just delicious, Judith had said. They are blood, veins, hearts, when picked at the right moment. Back then, he had thought she was romanticizing it. Now, he wasn't so sure. Frank bought a box, not for any profit, but because he remembered Judith's eyes lighting up at the first bite. Back then, she'd said strawberries were vasodilators and anti-inflammatory, and he'd always thought that was her excuse for eating so much without feeling guilty. But now he didn't think about it. Any little thing in his day that reminded him of her, he'd bring it home. That afternoon, he washed the strawberries under the tap and arranged them on a white porcelain plate. He placed them by the window, where the sunlight slanted down, casting a golden glow on the wooden table. The plate of strawberries lay there, so beautiful that he was in no hurry to eat them. Frank sat down, took the small spoon Judith used for dessert, cut a strawberry in half, and put it in his mouth. The cool sweetness spread just under the tip of his tongue, then receded into a slightly sour aftertaste, as if someone had whispered a memory in his ear. Judith's smile on the lawn in 1975, when they were still unmarried. She also took a bite of strawberry, then asked, "Do you think your blood is flowing fast or slow?" Frank said, "It must be faster, because you're sitting next to me." She laughed like a child. Frank swallowed the strawberry, feeling a sudden sting in his nose. Not because of the fruit, but because he wondered if his blood would ever flow as fast as it did then. But he knew one thing. The blood under his feet was coming back. No more sudden numbness after sitting for a long time. No more feeling dead after dinner. Every movement is now lighter. Not much, but enough for him to know he is changing. Not in the way doctors usually describe it in numbers, but in the way only the person experiencing it can feel it. A silent sign that says, "My body is listening to me again." Frank made no note that day. He simply folded the calendar down to a new line. And as the church bells rang in the distance, he took another bite of strawberry. Gently, slowly, like tasting himself after a long absence. While Frank washed the last of the strawberries, a light rain began to fall. The first rain of spring, cold, not heavy, but soaking to the core. He stood still by the window, watching each drop of water run down the glass like a stream of memories melting. Suddenly, he remembered the last orange in the basket on the table. Judith used to put it there whenever the wind started to pick up, because vitamin C strengthens the blood vessels, makes the walls more elastic. It acts as an umbrella for the blood in the storm, she said. He had thought that was an exaggeration, but that night he took the orange out and peeled it slowly. His hands trembled slightly, not because of old age, but because... The scent of orange essential oil rushed straight into his mind, taking him back to a Christmas 10 years ago. They were still well enough to decorate the tree. Judith made a special orange cinnamon sauce. She said the blood flow was better with the sweet, juicy navel oranges. Frank didn't mind, but she always added orange slices to dinner, like paint to a painting. He pulled off the first segment and chewed slowly. It was juicy, sweet, a little bitter near the peel, the way life often was. Sweet, but not quite. By the time Frank got to the third segment, his hand was warm, not just from the orange, but maybe from the feeling of doing what she had done. The right way. He clearly remembered Judith's words left in her notebook. "An orange a day is like holding your hand, sending blood to my toes." There was no wind that night, but he found he did not need the extra blanket. The soles of his feet were not as cold as they had been the nights of the previous year. He could feel the blood moving, not racing, but flowing, like an old river finding its source again. No medicine. No advice. Just an orange. And a memory big enough to keep the promise. "I will continue to live the way you believe is good for me." The next morning, Frank went to the kitchen and opened the little drawer where Judith had kept her sweets. There was a bar of dark chocolate there from last year, wrapped, unopened, 85% cocoa, not his favorite, but Judith had said, if there's anything that's good for the heart and sweet enough to keep hope alive, it's dark chocolate. Frank didn't like bitterness, but he knew there were things to relearn. like the way he learned to walk again every morning. He broke off a small piece, chewed it slowly. It was bitter, but then there was a soft aftertaste, not from the chocolate, but from within. The memory flashed back to Judith's 60th birthday. He gave her a pink woolen scarf. She gave him a box of dark chocolates and a small note. Don't be afraid of bitterness. It teaches you to enjoy the sweetness that remains. Frank sat down in the chair where Judith had read. He broke off another piece of chocolate, ate it, and closed his eyes. His eyes stung, not from the memory this time, but from the truth. His legs no longer ached when he bent them. All day long he walked around the yard, clearing leaves, watering plants, not because he was bored, but because he wanted to walk, to stand, to test how far his body could go after years of just sitting. No one knew what he had eaten. No one asked what diet he was on. But he knew, deep down, that Judith was watching him go on, with all the love she had put into her meals. The evening sun streamed through the window like honey. Frank sat down and opened his notebook. Write nothing. Just look. And let yourself be still with the belief. Blood is flowing, life is going on, and things that seemed to have left are slowly coming back. That afternoon, as the sun streamed down through the kitchen window, as gently as Judith's hand had once touched his shoulder, Frank opened the refrigerator and took out a bunch of spinach. Judith had called it the greens of the heart. He had always thought she was a little too romantic. It was just a vegetable. But she was a firm believer. The nitrates in spinach help the body produce nitric oxide, a substance that keeps the blood flowing more smoothly and steadily than any exercise. Frank washed each stem, boiled it lightly, and added it to the omelette. Judith used to make it for lunch, especially on days when they argued. He remembered clearly one afternoon in May 1993. They had been arguing all afternoon over trivial matters, and she had made lunch with spinach. You may not listen to me, but your blood needs this flow, she said as she set the plate down on the table and went upstairs to close the door. Frank didn't understand then. Now he does. He ate alone. No TV, no radio, just the sound of the knife cutting through the yolk, the slow aroma, and Judith's image. Not angry, not speaking, just those eyes that knew everything he had missed. That afternoon, Frank took his stroller out into the backyard, a gently sloping lawn that he hadn't dared to walk down for more than a year for fear of falling. But today, he tried. His feet touched the grass, and he lost his balance at first, but then he steadied himself. He walked on. No need to hold on. When he reached the rose bush, which Judith had planted for her afternoon reading, Frank bent down and plucked one. For the first time in nearly 2 years, he could bend down without feeling dizzy. No one cheered, no one filmed, just him, the rose, and Judith somewhere in the wind. His body turned, not in a rush, but quietly, like light jazz at dusk. He brought in the rose and placed it on the table. Not to worship it, but to remind her everything that has died can bloom again. That evening he made a cup of ginger tea. Judith had used ginger when she was sick, but she also said, ginger is what warms the heart before it warms the mouth. Frank cut a few slices of ginger and boiled them in hot water. As the spicy smell of ginger wafted up, he closed his eyes. Suddenly, he remembered the long train ride from Atlanta to Asheville years ago, when Judith brought him a bottle of ginger tea in a floral bag, pouring it sip by sip for him because he was seasick and dizzy. Ginger keeps the stomach stable, she said that day, and also keeps the blood flowing properly, back to the heart. Frank didn't understand, but now he felt it. Every sip of tea was like a vein being unlocked, a memory being recalled, a heartbeat starting to synchronize again. That night, he slept deeply. No dreams, no restlessness, no waking up in the middle of the night because of cramps. The next morning, when he woke up, he didn't need to lie down for another few minutes to wake up his legs like he usually did. He stood up and walked straight to the door. The morning was mild. The wind blew through his collar, but he was not cold. His feet were warm. His chest was warm. His eyes were brighter. And for the first time, he whistled while watering the plants. Frank began to change his meal times, not because anyone told him to, but because he found his body responded differently to eating a little earlier. His lunch now included a few chopped celery stalks, something Judith used to force-feed on hot days. Celery is crunchy, and the veins like it, she used to say, because it relaxes the walls, like someone has taken a load off their insides. Frank laughed at the memory, but he cut the celery anyway. Sliced it, mixed it with green apples, a few almonds. The salad Judith used to make when they had a fight. The make-up dish. The no-apology dish. When he ate, he did not chew quickly. Taking a bite, he heard the crisp crack, like the soft breaking of unspoken words. Judith often took a bite and said, "It is not delicious because of the smell, it is because of the sound." He ate in silence, but the sound echoed in his head. Not the sound of celery, but her laughter, that sunny afternoon on the back porch. And like every time lately, after a meal, his body no longer reacted as slowly as before. No longer tired, no longer lying down for a while. He even got up to wash the dishes. In the afternoon, he went out to the garden to mow the lawn. His hand gripped the handle of the lawnmower firmly. His feet kept his balance. No one but him knew that only 2 months ago he would not have dared to bend down to pick up a newspaper without holding onto the table. At night, he made himself a glass of pomegranate juice. Judith had kept that habit in the fall. Pomegranate is what the blood needs to remember how young you were, she said. Back then, he poured it into a glass of wine. It's not intoxicating, she said, but it helps my heart know I'm alive. Frank drank slowly, his eyes on the photograph of Judith on the shelf. The glass was as dark as wine, but to him at that moment it looked like a vow. The first sip was not sweet. The second sip spread out like a deep breath. The third sip, he suddenly felt his chest soften. It was as if a stream of blood was flowing from his heart straight to the soles of his feet, faint, but clear. Frank put down his glass. He stood up. He walked from the living room to the back door. Each step, no longer waiting for a response from his brain, from his knees. He walked as if his legs were calling him to continue. The next morning, he prepared something Judith had always wanted him to try, but had never seriously tried. Beetroot juice. Beetroot is the blood's favorite thing, because it makes the blood remember the old path, to return to the place where it had gone to sleep, Judith had written in her notebook. Frank squeezed a small beetroot, added some apple, a few slices of lemon, and drank it quietly. There was no more knowledge in his head, only a feeling. From his stomach, a warm current spread, not quickly, not clearly, but like a silent commitment of the body. I heard you. That afternoon, Frank walked to the lake without stopping. When he arrived, he sat down on his usual stone bench. The sunlight shone on the water, sparkling. The wind blew gently through his silver hair. A woman passed by, leading her child. She smiled at him, gently. "Hello, Uncle." Frank nodded. The boy looked at him for a moment, then asked, "Were you ever a soldier?" Frank laughed. "No, but I just fought for 84 days, with my legs." The child did not understand. But the grandmother paused for a moment. Her eyes lit up as if she had just heard a true story that did not need to be told. Frank closed his eyes, not because he was tired, but because he wanted to hold on to this moment, the way blood holds memories in its veins, things that were thought to be gone but were actually just sleeping, and now everyone is waking up, with him. Frank no longer counted the days, he no longer marked them on his calendar, no longer made detailed notes in his notebook. Life had slowly returned in the quietest of ways, like blood returning without fanfare, but steady as a rock by a lake. It was a clear, sunny March morning, with a spring-scented breeze wafting through the redwood trees in the front yard. Frank made tea, no longer out of habit, but out of pleasure. He no longer had to consider what to eat to get his blood flowing. Every food he chose now was a part of him. On the kitchen counter was an omelette with spinach, a sprinkle of walnuts, orange slices, and a few pieces of pickled beets from the night before. Not forced. Not out of fear of illness, but because his body had learned to love itself again. Outside, a squirrel ran across the paved path. A garbage truck honked in the distance. Everything was normal, but to Frank, normal was a miracle, because there was a time when he thought he would never get up to answer the door again. That day, he decided to walk farther than usual, not just around the yard, but a full circle around the large park near his house, old shoes, light jacket, no cane. He walked slowly, not in a hurry, past the bench where he and Judith had last sat, past the coffee shop with her favorite espresso, past the brick wall with the scrawled words, "Everything returns to love." Frank paused at that line for a long time. Late in the afternoon, he returned home, put down his teacup, and sat on the sofa. No more thoughts of illness, no more worries about his blood vessels, his heartbeat, the pressure in his feet. There was only one sentence left in his mind, the sentence Judith had written on the last piece of paper he left behind. If one day you can walk without pain, don't thank medicine. Don't thank time. Thank love, because it is love that keeps your blood flowing in the right direction. Frank smiled. He stood up, not because he needed to, but because his body now wanted to walk. This is not a story about illness. This is a story about living, about coming back, about remembering that. Even when you feel parts of yourself are slowly turning off, they can be awakened. By the smallest thing, a memory, a meal, a person, a love. Frank went back into the kitchen, turned off the light, washed the teacup with his bare hands, no longer shaking. He hung the towel on the hook as Judith had done, carefully. It was getting dark. Not cold, not afraid. Before going to bed, he looked over at the little table where Judith had kept the radio. No one sat there now, but he smiled anyway, because there are presences that need neither light nor sound. They are there, like blood under the skin, like the heartbeat under the chest, like love that needs no words. If you are going through slower, heavier, quieter days, and if you believe that there is still something good waiting for you ahead, please click subscribe to the channel so that every time you come back here, we continue a new journey. Please share this video with your relatives and friends. Who knows, someone might need a gentle handshake, even if it's just through a small screen. And in the next video, we will continue together, this time on another journey. Top 7 Best Meats for Diabetics You Should Eat. Lower blood sugar. Another story, another person, but still about the belief that no matter how long we have neglected our health, there is always a door to return. See you tomorrow. And don't forget, we just don't stop.